Thanks for joining us for Political Talk on another PolitiPod Live. Tonight we'll cover Subpoena Colada, Iced Out, Affordability Bill, Democratic Establishment versus Progressives, It's War, and Epstein Update. I'm Tom Bickle.
I'm Hannah Saltner. Excuse me.
And I'm Matt Nisanoff. And we'll start off with Subpoena Colada. Subpoena Colada in part because of all the decisions that SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, has just passed, or that we're just learning of. Among them, I'm going to mention a couple of them, then open up a discussion on it. But among other things, the E. Jean Carroll decision for $5 million on the assault and the defamation afterwards. The Supreme Court said, yeah, that should go ahead. And they didn't say in the affirmative, but they said that the decision, they weren't going to say anything about it. They're going to let it go. And that means the lower court's ruling stays, and that says $5 million goes to E. Jean Carroll. Now there's another case for her because Trump continued to harass her afterwards, after the decision saying, here's $5 million because of the sexual assault. Trump made a concerted effort to be insulting and rude and demeaning and constantly bringing her up to attack her because she won money from him. And all of that helped provide the courts with a second opportunity in which they awarded $83 million. So the Supreme Court's doubled down on the $5 million, and now the 83 is in the court system and will come up with the Supreme Court. So we get to wait for another day where another decision is made against Trump that will allow E. Jean Carroll another $83 million. There's also the SCOTUS ruling that they can't fire a Fed member named Lisa Cook. Trump has been targeting her, African-American woman, and he has been trying desperately to do everything to undermine her and to cut her out. But the Supreme Court now says you can't do it, not at least based on the way you're doing it and what you're doing it for. However, you can go after other people in other positions. So it gave him something while taking something away. There's also a ruling about late arriving votes. What that means is the vote by mail, the places that do vote by mail have a rule that as long as the postmark is prior to the or includes election day, then they give it a 7 to 10 day window to let any mail that might have the correct postmark to come in, and they count that vote. Well, of course, Trump used that as a proof of his alleged allegations of fraud in elections, and so he went after that. And of course, the court said that's ridiculous. Of course, this makes sense. There's delays. There's people, military people voting from overseas. There's people who are there's a lot of reasons why people would be voting by mail, and there's a lot of reasons why you need that window to allow those who have in good faith voted and turned in their ballot before the election to have their vote counted. And the Supreme Court actually upheld that decision. And there's a handful of other decisions. So what do you guys think? What do you think of the Supreme Court? What do you think about the rulings that are... You said it, Groucho. We will definitely talk about that in a few minutes. But before we get to that, how about what you guys think about Supreme Court decisions?
There is a famous quote from The Simpsons by, I think it's groundskeeper Willie. I'm bad at this. And that's Trump with the defamation trial and constantly hammering and heckling E. Jean Carroll, and he turned a misdemeanor into a felony, basically, but in civil court. He just molehill into a mountain. Yeah, he mishandled it. He bungled it so hard it's exponentially worse because he had anything to do with it, and much like the presidency.
Do you want our opinions on the ones you talked about or other ones as well?
The floor is open, please.
Yeah, so I mean, I agree with the, I guess, witch hunt, for lack of a better term, of Eugene Carroll. It's ridiculous. I hope she makes the money, especially Trump, who's, been pretty open about his use of the courts to kind of silence dissent. Um, and then the late arriving votes, voter suppression is always, I mean, it's awful, but it always like strikes me as like so weird because I feel like so many other countries are just like doing whatever they can. Like it's not an issue, like they're just trying to get more people to vote, and they have like voting parties and whatever. And here we're trying to be like, don't give people water, don't accept late votes, don't whatever. Um, as for some of the stuff that wasn't talked about, I think the one that's really sticking with me is the birthright citizenship one. Um, it stayed law, which is good, 5-4. But it should have been non-controversial. It's very plain language in the Constitution. And I read the Kavanaugh / Thomas words about it, and it was absurd. They were like, the people who wrote it couldn't have imagined like modern life, but like there's been, that sort of ignores the like 150 years of precedence almost since it was signed, of it just getting like reaffirmed and whatever. And it also, that kind of sort of buys into the fact that like most like of these sort of immigration issues are people who like sneak in and whatever, and that's not how it works. A lot of it is expired visas. Yeah. And then the ban on trans women and girls in sports, obviously a personal bugbear of mine, but it's wild to say that it doesn't violate Title IX when it's specifically only trans women and trans girls who can't. That feels like specifically targeting one gender of people. I don't understand how they can say that it doesn't. And then, of course, SCOTUS struck down campaign finance restrictions that I think were put in Nixon's era, and I just feel like that's, it's always bad news ever since Citizens United, and probably previous. And then, sort of semi-related, I did want to note that NPR mistakenly reported that Sam Alito was retiring, and I just don't know how that happens. Too much rush to get a story out before verifying it.
Yeah, I assume it's just having real people doing the work. Sometimes you hear something and you go and think you've got things laid out and you've made a mistake. And they did, but they also were upfront about it when they realized what had happened. They recognized it. They accepted the responsibility. That's something that some more politically based people will never do. But they were straight up about it. Hey, we made a mistake. But it's true. And that is of the SCOTUS decisions, though. Thank you for mentioning all the ones that I did not earlier, and especially that sort of weird thing about birthright citizenship splitting on a 5-4 vote. I agree with you. That just is it is a sign of the times that something that is in the Constitution, black and white, it's very clear, but somehow there's this allowance for, I don't know what it is, the ultra right wing ethos to hey, it's the Department of War, oh, birthright citizenship, we should question that, and it's just that sort of nonsense that somehow works its way through. Tom, anything else about SCOTUS before, or Tom or Hannah, anything else before we move on along?
I did have something quick, but Tom, if you want to go first.
I just want to point out the pattern that Republicans keep solving problems that don't exist, that aren't problems, that could be safely ignored, like the immigrant caravans coming to this country, like the Haitians eating dogs and cats, like the voting fraud. It's all bullshit. It's designed to keep them doing things that further their corruption and their stranglehold on their office, and zero for the American people. And I don't know. I don't. I have it every day that it goes on. It brings down my estimation of this country and its people, that we're so stupid that we let this go on and we can't figure out how to counteract it. The end.
I think it's basically since Gingrich, the Republicans have changed their focus from debating issues and policy
Mhm.
because they lose. They spent 30 to
Sure.
50 years losing on that argument. So
Yeah.
they thought, well, what else can we do? And the answer is, what is an emotional thing that will provoke an emotional reaction from our
Yeah.
supporters?
Yeah. We can scare the
So,
dumb half of this country into hating blacks and browns and women, and uh, living in fear of God. And God, by the way, says whatever I say he says. It's all you eventually you have to see the magic trick for what it is, and we don't. And it's just more division. It's just subdivide and conquer. And again, the people should be smart enough to eventually figure that out. We're not. We fall for buzzwords, and we fall for jingoism, and we fall for false patriotism, and we fall for, oh my God, there's a brown guy and his wang might be bigger than yours. He's going to come take your women. That's what it all boils down to. It's just the stupid chimpanzee base of the skull, brainstem, lizard brain workings that people don't think at a higher level. They just hear you know, socialism, communism, social democracy, uh, anything but square dancing and apple pie, and they want to pull a gun. Uh, I wish we were smarter than this, but I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah, and I guess, my point is a little bit undermined by what you said because it's true. But
Sorry.
I feel like one of the things that frustrates me so much about this decision is if you don't agree with birthright citizenship, I don't agree with you, but if you don't agree with it, there is a proper way to change it. And I just can't buy the argument that like
And
these,
Republicans and apparently half of the Supreme Court think that that's Trump writing it on a doily or on a cocktail napkin and holding it up for the cameras. That's an executive order. Boom. That's all you need.
right. But it's like an amendment to the Constitution requires 2/3 of each house and 3/4 of the state to ratify. So I don't buy that idea of like nobody saw, had the forethought to think that this could be used differently. And if you think that that's wrong, I mean, deal with the way they did with prohibition, just make a new amendment. If it passes, then I can still disagree with you, but you are right according to the laws.
right. But there's no way Trump's going to follow the law. I mean, come
Right.
on, be serious.
No, it's
There's
true. It's true.
he certainly doesn't follow laws, the 34-time felon, and he certainly doesn't have the ability or patience to do something that would require going through a legislative process that made 3/4 of the vote here and all the states start to ratify. He doesn't have the time. He's not going to live 10 years, so he doesn't have the time to wait. He's got to have things happen immediately. The way to do that's through executive orders. So all of these um, alt-right bizarre ideas get executive orders because it happens quicker, or at least he thinks quicker. And being executive orders, of course, they all stop as soon as he stops being president. But he doesn't know that either. He doesn't understand that. So he thinks he's ruling by decree. I think is a fair summation. And speaking of summations, we are going to turn away from SCOTUS and legal, although we will mention something about Colorado that took place, but we'll bring that in a little later. First, though, we will be moving on to our iced out issue and news from the world of ice. The most recent information is that Lance Sawyer, a former Marine and a Oklahoma State trooper, has been named to lead ICE. Previously, he also led a program to help connect law enforcement with immigration authorities. So he is well versed in the form of ICE that he would like to see. And it's unclear which police crimes he might condone, but he was named by Trump, so we'll see. We'll find out in real time. It does demand that the Senate vote on this. This is one of those things where the Senate is supposed to advise and consent, according to that pesky old Constitution. And
We're still doing that?
yeah, can you believe it?
So
Occasionally,
inconvenient.
that
From time to
occasionally
time.
rears up its ugly head.
Yeah, right. From time now and
So-
then we are. It's kind of, it's like an old TV. You got to whack it on the side and it flickers, but usually it's good.
What else do you think about this? The new appointment to a new ICE leader, and
I
whether
don't
or
know
not
the
he has.
person, but if Trump likes him, he's got to be terrible.
Right. Does he have one of those long trench coats? We'll have to find out.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure he's going to be, of all the cabinet of ghouls and nincompoops and idiots and more ghouls, I'm sure he's the good one. I'm sure he's fine.
Yeah, right.
It's always impressive that to get in at this point, you have to be a second, third, fourth, fifth rate ghoul. So
It's true. It's true. The good time to get in was earlier, before the country knew exactly how many dimensions we were going to get screwed on.
Yeah. I don't know if this is just deck chairs on the Titanic, or basically, you just throw up the next lackey and let them take a fall, and when they take too many falls, you throw up the lackey after them, or what? But it just feels like anybody could probably get. It doesn't seem too different from hiring a bagman for $5 to beat somebody up or something. Just like, great, take the fall for this, and then when you do, I'll just get the next person.
Well, your trouble with your theory. Now, lackey was a non-gendered term, but bagman has the word man in it, and Trump don't fire the men. He
That's true.
fires
You know what?
the women.
That's true.
So if that lackey, if there's a, the French probably have a female version, gendered version of it in there. Everything's gendered in those Latin languages. But yeah, if lackey is a woman, yeah, then somebody's going to get held up as a human shield and discarded like tissue, used tissue. But if it's a guy, no, he could be a complete block of wood and he'll be fine. He'll be there till the end.
It's true.
He'll probably
Or go
be
on to
testifying in the congressional hearings next year.
right, or go on to a cushy Fox News or one of these One American News or whatever jobs.
Absolutely. Maybe they could be Brondo salesmen. It's what plants crave.
It is what plants grow. You know what? There is no denying that.
It's true, and you know it.
All right. Well, turning our eyes away from ICE and on to other issues. The next thing we're talking about tonight is the affordability bill. This is something you may have heard of because it is indeed incredibly popular with both political parties. It's actually a piece of legislation that garnered bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate and was so popular that it passed by large margins in both houses or in both bodies. And Trump just shrugged at it and said, I don't know, bipartisan House, and demanded his election rigging for Republicans bill. That it
That's
be
a direct
that,
quote, by the way. The medication's not really working.
So Trump lied that he had not received the housing bill. He called it a big yawn, so unimportant, while pushing his quote unquote SAVE Act, which rigs elections for Republicans.
You remember when he tried to do the same thing with the Epstein files about 7 months ago? They all showed up at some cabinet meeting or something, and press asked him about it, and he goes, "The Epstein files? Are we still talking about that? Geez, salute." And it's like the least convincing thing I've ever seen in my life, and the room just let it land with a thud. And then I think next month they passed the Epstein Transparency Act.
It is,
Jeez,
yeah. I mean,
fellas, hey, can we give it a rest here? Nobody's talking about this anymore. Am I right? Huh? Huh?
I mean, I hear the economy is doing amazing according to Trump. So why
Oh
would we
yeah,
need an affordability bill?
Dow's over 50,000.
That's right.
actually, I believe last month affordability was a Democratic hoax,
Oh,
Yeah,
right.
according to the same source. Um, but hey, here it is, wildly popular with both parties in the legislative body. Yeah, he does that with everything. He doesn't talk about issues or details. He gives everything that sort of emotional spin of either, oh, it is a good thing and therefore it is beautiful and wonderful, or it is a bad thing and it is a yawn and a unimportant and uh, why why do people even talk about it? That's his. That's his the level of his ability in order to convey that he either likes a thing or does not like a thing.
yeah. I
Um,
really I appreciate his level of oratory has just completely flattened out to where everything is the best you've ever seen on so many levels, or the worst you've ever seen on so many levels, and he really hasn't. There's no discourse on anything. It's either the most or the biggest or the best or the least or the worst or the smallest. That's it. It doesn't mean you can just plug in different nouns and the rhetoric doesn't change. And he honestly he started doing that before the last campaign, or excuse me, during the last campaign, and he never could. He didn't know if there was, if the GDP was 3 trillion or 300 billion or 30 trillion or whatever. He's just it's a lot. I'll double it.
right,
Number be bigger.
right, exactly. Yeah, like the his cabinet or acting cabinet member who said in front of Congress, "Hey, listen, things are you might think that what you're talking about is a bad thing, but you know the stock market is up at $50,000." Not only showing absolute misunderstanding of what the stock market is or how it works,
Right.
or even how it's the connotations that are in it, but trying to make that sort of a is there something that you can divert the conversation to when you're talking about something that you don't like? Um, and so he's doing that same thing here. Here's the Affordability Act is wildly popular. Do we have that slide? I think there's a slide that shows the actual vote count of the Affordability Act. And so the Affordability Act talks about housing and getting people uh, using commercial spaces. Part of the law allows for the unused commercial spaces to be used to build affordable housing. And there's 3 or 4 different perks that will, with the end game being more housing. And that's definitely something that has been neglected in every state. I know I'm in New York. I know here housing has been very difficult to build. The builders will say it's too much money, but the costs are so much higher here. But they seem to be able to do it with the luxury apartments and the luxury housing. They just can't quite seem to get to it to build the affordable housing that they have previously promised as part of getting the legislation zoning changed to allow them to do the building, and they kind of just leave it out. And then people come and say, "Hey, you're not building that stuff you said you would," and they say, "Well, give me a fine, fine find me
Hmm.
per day, and that's okay because whatever you're asking me to pay per day is worth it to not build affordable housing."
Right.
So we'll see if any of the changes that the Mondami administration comes in having to face that problem that's been building for decades, and under both Democratic and Republican mayors, and that's not unsimilar to current mayors everywhere. They're all facing that, and there's a question of how to do it. This is a bill from the federal government that would help. So, of course, Trump has to try to sink it. There was a backlash from it not being signed into law, but it is fair to point out that Speaker Johnson of the House did claim that the House could override a veto, but wouldn't have to. And what he means by that is Trump is not saying he's going to veto the affordability bill. He's just saying he doesn't want to deal with it until he gets his quote unquote SAVE Act done. But what he also doesn't understand about legislation is that when a bill is put on his desk, there's a 10-day period where if he chooses not to sign it, that's okay. It still goes into law. He has to actively veto something to stop it. So what's happening here is, whether he knows it or not, he's going to allow it to just go into law, into effect. It will be a law within 10 days. And so I think that's what Speaker Johnson is relying on, so that he doesn't have to override a Trump veto, which I'm sure he's scared to death of even contemplating, much less actually having the, let's say, fortitude to actually do.
Now, wasn't there? Mike Johnson has carried water for Trump several times in the past. He held up the swearing in of a Democrat in the last an election several months ago because they didn't want to pass the Epstein thing, as I recall. And then didn't he make a day in the House's calendar, the entire session, the entire what is it? Their whatever term. He made it a rule that a day lasts like whatever it was, like months and months, so that after a certain number of days something was to happen, and it prevented the something that was meant to happen, that was written into the rules to happen. He just said, well, a day lasts like 36 days, or I don't know, 3 months or whatever it was. And again, it forestalled something that democracy demands, that the rules demand to happen when X, Y, and Z happens, when you have a majority, when you have an election, da 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 da. And he just controverted it. And I mean, what's going to stop him from pulling that same nonsense again?
Well, I mean, I do think, again, hopefully the plain language of the Constitution, but I do feel like this, I think the reason why this is so popular and has bipartisan support is it feels like it's a classic, it's the economy stupid situation. Like you can do all you want if you can make something partisan, or like, hey, it's a Democratic witch hunt or whatever, but it's very hard to spin that I vetoed the affordability bill.
I mean, they did that with the Epstein Act, though, and that was very popular. They forestalled that for weeks and months.
Yeah, but people care about money a lot more than they care about anything.
Okay.
Hopefully. I think that's why it's bipartisan.
I mean, right, they've been in session or whatever. They've been in office for almost 2 years now, and they haven't passed jack shit for the people till now. I mean, if we're as cowed and sedated and feckless now as we were this entire 18-month period, why wouldn't they put it off again? They don't respect us. They don't care what we care about. Yeah, it's popular, and it sounds, and they know they're going to get beat over the head with it. But I don't understand why they think it's going to be okay. Or maybe they thought
I'll give you.
Going to work out.
I'll chip in a little bit here. See what you think.
I need some.
See what you think about this. First of all, with the Epstein Transparency Act, they could fight that because they were trying to still protect the pedophiles. They want to protect the pedophiles, so they were. They also didn't have as much opposition against them for it. In other words, there were a handful of Republicans that joined Democrats in order to get that bill passed. And so they could continue to oppose it because they wanted to please Trump with the majority of their caucus supporting that position. With the affordability bill, they can't do that because they don't have that support. Look at that vote number. In the House, it passed 358 to 32. That's not done with one party. That is a really true bipartisan something. That is, you have to have overwhelming support from both parties to get 358 votes, especially now because your point is right. You are absolutely correct. They will not do, or they will try to play out as much as possible. That's sort of a delay tactic that McConnell brought in on the Senate side, and all of the MAGA and pro MAGA people are perfectly happy with that kind of thing, and you're absolutely right. However, here, so many people so many of their own caucus support it that it might be more difficult to just screw it away because 358 people are of your 450 of your colleagues are all of a sudden for it. So you got to kind of go, oh, well, okay, there's one thing here. And plus, they want to be able to point to something. I think you're wrong about it being there not being anything behind it. I think it is that the election is coming up and they want to be able to say they have something that they did, and they want to have something they can say is popular. They want to have something that says it actually would help if it were to be moved through, or once it does get moved through and actually gets funded and actually gets started. So they do want to have an achievement, and with overwhelming bipartisan support, that's the kind of thing you can get behind just because everybody's behind it. So there's that, and then you'll see the number there as well. The House was 358 to 32, and the Senate was 85 to 5. The MAGA Trump era Senate voted 85 to 5 to pass the Affordability Act after the same era Congress passed it 358 to 32.
I would take issue with one thing you said, that Trump doesn't. You seem to imply that maybe Trump doesn't understand that it's going to become law if he just sits on his big butt. I think someone will eventually whisper that to him over his third Diet Coke, and it's not that hard to understand. If it was really complex, I'd say, yeah, he probably won't get it, and maybe there's nothing he can do about it. The die seems to already be cast. He can either sign it or not sign it, but.
Well, he could
yeah.
actively veto it, and just I have to bring up the point you said that I implied it. No, I specifically said it.
Okay, I couldn't remember exactly how you put it. I don't want to
I
accuse you.
very clearly said it, and I because I think it's the truth. Yes, I'm sure somebody has said it to him in a meeting. Yes, I'm sure that was not the last person who spoke to him, or the last person who spoke to him on this specific issue. So there's no way that he's going to remember that and consider it. And because of his own actions, I would say there's no way he could, because if he were cognizant of that, then he would just veto the thing.
So you think he's gonna sleep right through it? That's your prediction. He's not going to veto
for the affordability, yeah, I think for the affordability bill, he's going to complain and try to use any conversation about the Affordability Act, affordability bill, to try to spin the conversation to his saving Republican election hopes of his quote unquote SAVE Act, because he's trying to change the narrative. And he doesn't want something good to happen. He wants to make certain he gets what he wants, which is the SAVE Act. So he's going to talk about that every chance he gets. Whenever anybody, the affordability, I don't even know what that is. This is unimportant. I don't know. And then he's going to turn the conversation to the thing that he wants to talk about, because that's his style. I only have 2 terms of his being president to support my theory, but
I do want to point out there is a fourth option that I was actually just reading about in advance of this. There's something called a pocket veto. So if it gets it's already been passed, but let's say it's a theoretical law. If it gets passed and it gets sent up to the president, he has 10 days to sign it, and if he doesn't, it becomes law. However, if he vetoes it and the houses of Congress are on break, if nothing happens, if they don't return in 10 days to override his veto, it just disappears. So there's also that.
Yeah, there is that thing, but we're not close enough to a recess or the end of this Congress for him to be able to pull that off. But yes,
Yeah, and
you are correct.
I imagine there is too many eyes on this bill to pocket veto it. So
Yeah, for a normal politician, they wouldn't even, they may not consider it. And for him, he certainly wouldn't do that. No, Tom is right. Somebody else in the administration might come up with the idea or think about it or talk to him about it. But it's not going to be somebody important enough for him to bother to listen to. And he's certainly, not going to follow through on something that is such, from his perspective, such minutia of legislation allegedly. With that said, I'm going to suggest that we turn our eyes, the nation turns its weary eyes to our next issue, which is Democratic establishment versus progressives. This is sort of the inside baseball of the Democratic Party. And it's very interesting to see what's happening because there's some things that are happening that have not happened before. And the establishment is, the establishment of Andrew Cuomo and Chuck Schumer and uh,
Pelosi.
there you go. There's a lot of a lot of folks, and so what is going on is in recent elections, people who are calling themselves progressives are starting to win the elections in the primaries. And the primary election, where the party members come together to elect who their champion will be for the general election down the road, are starting to select progressive. So, for instance, in Kentucky, for the Democratic nomination for the empty Senate seat down there, Charlie Booker took on Amy McGrath in the Democratic primary, and Amy won last time the last cycle. This was a race. These two folks met, and that time Amy McGrath won. This time, Charlie Booker proclaimed himself proudly to be a progressive, and he won the larger areas of Kentucky. The Democratic Party for Kentucky, the Jefferson and Fayette counties, and Amy McGrath took the more rural areas. And simply put, there's more votes in Jefferson and Fayette County. So Charlie Booker is the Democratic nominee for Senate in, of all places, Kentucky, and he is running as a progressive, a proud progressive. You look at Maine, the progressive Greg Plattner, who will be the Democratic nominee for the Senate seat up there. The unfortunately not open seat, that's Susan Collins' seat. You may know the famous senator and wall sitter Susan Collins, who will coast her way to the November election. And then Greg Plattner will have an opportunity to run against her. We'll see what Maine wants. But he has run as a progressive consistently in this race. He was named by Bernie Sanders and the collection of the more progressive, not only senators but supporters. And when he was looking like he had a 9-point lead in the polls, all of a sudden, all these stories about sexting and all these things that he had done that are not so acceptable, perhaps, from an adult with another adult and a consenting adult. But that was all brought up after he was shown being in the lead. Now it's kind of closer. They're within the statistical error. So it's like 45, 47 in the polls right now. So we'll see what actually happens in November. But his establishment opponent in the primary was the current governor, the incumbent governor of Maine, Janet Mills, was the person who ran against progressive Greg Plattner, and things were going so well for him that Mills dropped out of the race. She didn't even finish the primary election cycle. She dropped out, so he became the nominee. Sort of, he was bound to become the nominee because the opposite the establishment opponent dropped out. Down in Texas, James Tallarico, Democratic nominee against the Republican and walking disaster zone known as Ken Paxton. Paxton's wife recently divorced him based on what she called the quote biblical lack of biblical values unquote, and has been endorsed by Trump. Of course, after that, Trump would of course endorse him, and that has brought about a rift within the Republican Party in Texas. Tallarico, we'll see if he beat Representative Jasmine Crockett pretty handily, and he is going to, and his whole campaign has been, I'm a progressive, I'm a progressive with Christian values. So we'll see how things go in Texas for him. Now, the big couple of things that have happened were the New York primary and the last night's Colorado primary. And in Colorado last night, the Democratic primaries brought the left wins in a number of big races. One or two did not win, but some primary examples are the Democratic nomination for governor. Michael Bennet, a senator, was up for the establishment, and Phil Weiser, who is actually the state's attorney general, but ran his campaign as I'm kind of an outside progressive kind of guy. And that worked. The election was 55% for Weiser and 44% for Bennett. And the Democratic nominee is going to be Weiser in the governor's race. Now, in the Senate race, the opposite results happened where the establishment guy, John Hickenlooper, also a senator, went up against Julie Gonzalez, who was the progressive, and the exact opposite results, where Hickenlooper, the establishment guy, got 55 and Gonzalez got 44. And if you look at the map, the official election result map, it looks much worse for Gonzalez because Hickenlooper won every single county except the city of Denver. The city of Denver voted for her. Every single other place voted for Hickenlooper. So it was pretty definitive, but it came out, the final total was 55-44. So the establishment got one there. Back to the progressives, however, in the Congressional District 1, the Democratic Socialists of America, Milat Kiros, took the nomination from Diana DeGetti. DeGetti is a 15-time congressperson, so that's 30 years in Congress. She's had opponents before and always dispatched them rather handily, but last night, that's not what happened. And DeGetti is actually the 7th House member to lose renomination at the time of this recording. So from both parties, Democrats and there are 2 Republicans 5 Democrats, 2 Republicans who have lost being renominated as the incumbent. So that's something that's noteworthy because usually incumbents coast. But things like this are actually happening out there. And in the 8th Congressional District, it also had a progressive candidate, Manny. I'm going to mispronounce this, I'm afraid. Root Neely. I apologize for mispronouncing it, but he was versing the established candidate Shannon Byrd, and Manny took it 62% to 39. So he really, whereas all the other ones were 55-45, which is still pretty much a landslide, Manny really mopped the floor with Byrd, 62-33. So he'll be the Democratic nominee. We'll see what comes from having progressives on the ballot in November. And also in the Denver area, there were some state races. There were 2 or 3 seats on the local level, on the state level of Colorado government that went with progressive candidates for the Democratic nominee instead of establishment members. And of course, the big story from last week was in New York City. and it happened on both the national level and some local, very local seats where progressive candidates just did incredibly well against establishment candidates. This is not like in 2025 where aggressive DSA candidate Mandami, uh, handily dispatched of the establishment Andrew Cuomo candidate. But there's a local thing in Brooklyn called the county committee. It has a executive committee, and they went in with the establishment having 23 or 25 seats somewhere in there, and now they lost about 9 elections. So it will be a progressive for the first time ever. The local county committee will be in the progressives' hands, and that also was shown in the federal level elections, uh, where Mondami endorsed 3 candidates for Congress, and all 3 of them won. So 3 out of 3 is certainly not bad. And he was supporting them early on when people were still saying, "Oh, you may not want to do that," and you don't want to endorse too early and all that kind of thing. And he did endorse them, and they all won, so it worked out. There's also in New York a thing where the establishment is getting kicked back from on one of former mayor Eric Adams, one of his vice mayors, Randy Maestro, who has been leading a thing called the Charter Revision Committee that was put in place by Adams and then disbanded several days after Mandami became mayor. He disbanded it and replaced it with people from his administration, which makes sense. But Maestro is saying, well, but I was appointed by Mayor Adams and therefore I'm still a thing. And our revision committee wants to have open elections in the primaries. Right now they're closed, meaning only the people from within the party that the primary is for vote in that primary. And he's saying, no, it should be open. Everybody should vote in the every primary. So we'll see how far he gets, not having any actual power anymore, and whether or not Mayor Mondami is allowed to do things like name people to his administration because it's his administration. Okay, so all of that was supposed to be background for talking about establishment versus progressives. What do you think?
Well, I just want to say, as a person who was born in Colorado and now lives in New York, you're welcome for all this. No, I mean it's it's a good sign, hopefully, as a person who's pretty progressive in my sort of politics, I guess I'm always happy about it. But I do want to note that Mamdani had, a campaign where he listened to people and he asked people and he has a lot of history of organizing and these kinds of things. And so, I would hope that a lot of these sort of, you know, new into office people do similar and do good jobs for their constituents, as opposed to just, that's kind of, you know, it doesn't really mean anything to me if you have my politics if you're not really doing anything. And yeah, and then I guess from the Colorado standpoint, Colorado is a state that really values its sort of independent thinking, which is how it gives us these sort of progressive candidates while also giving us, MAGA Republicans. And so, yeah, it's always interesting to see how elections go there. We'll see. But I guess what I want to say is that I don't want to horseshoe theory because it's not that at all, but both of them do represent frustration with how things have been going.
Yeah, and I think that, I would absolutely agree with your point that it's exciting to win the election. Now you got to do something. What these wins really mean is that the progressives are going to have to put up or shut up. They're going to have to actually follow through and do things now, and see that they work out well. so that they can say after that, the next cycle, they'll be able to say, hey, look, we wanted to come in to make a difference, and we are, as opposed to we want to come in and then, oh, well, but we can't do this and we're not going to do that and we're going to reconsider doing this. And that will kill not only good legislation and good policy, but it will also kill their chances because everybody will say, we've given you a chance. Now's your, you had a chance. And it's like in the United Kingdom with Keir Starmer. He was brought in saying, I'm going to change things. I'm going to strictly focus on making things efficient and working. And then he got in and he kind of didn't. And the country went sour on him.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
same
Well,
concept.
and then I just want to note there was a person, not to, if you're a watcher of our show, not to single you out, but there was a person who ran, in where I live in Brooklyn, who was talking about like his interest in like UBI and like 4-day work weeks and stuff like that. And those are things I agree with, but you're just like a local council member in Brooklyn. Like you have no power to do any of that. And so what I need you to like, that's great. I agree with you, but there's nothing that you're going to be able to do to affect that. What I need you to do is like, fix potholes and, one of the big things I saw is that like Mamdani like fixed a bridge, like a ramp over the Brooklyn Bridge. Like those kinds of things are small, but they're actually huge. That's what things really need to happen, and not that these other things aren't important, but like little governmental positions are also really important.
Yeah, they're the most direct effect. That they're the things you see every day.
Yeah.
So if that happens, then you see something change, and you are, it's encouraging. Also, I would like to point out for Colorado and for New York, these are places where the Republican Party has worked its way out of authority and done so resoundingly that the Democratic Party is often the Democratic nominee is usually the person who's going to be in office. I mean, I don't think a Republican has been in a Colorado state level seat for what 3-4 cycles, 6 or 8 cycles. I mean, it's been a while because the whole Colorado state party has gone wildly MAGA, extremely so, and so they're not winning elections in November in general elections because they take such extreme positions, and the voters there say, well, there's nothing for us to want to vote for here, and we'll
Right.
see. Yeah, so the primaries that's another reason I think that there's a lot of news coverage of Colorado and New York, not just because they were the last two primaries, but also because those are ones where the primaries the set the marker for who's going to actually wind up being in the election. Tom, anything on that before we move on?
Oh, I think the House always wins, and I think they'll. It as much as we're heartened by the rise of some progressives in primary season, I think the establishment will always have the last say until the people vote like they do in New York. I don't know how pervasive that's going to be, but you know I hope it goes well.
There you go. Well, Colorado apparently heard the message, and we'll see what happens next week. Now we're going to move on along. We saw Groucho earlier for a second. Let's bring Groucho back. Let's see what he says.
And that's war!
There you go. It's war. I don't know if you caught that. He got most of it out. It's war.
Ah, okay. I'm not seeing it, but give it a second. Well, he'll interrupt me. It'll be fine. I'll give him permission.
And that's
One
war!
person I'll let speak over me. It's Groucho. There he is on the video. So let me start in on this. It's war, and Iran has struck U.S. military bases. Oh, I'm sorry. As part of the vaunted peace agreement that has already been signed, Iran has struck U.S. military bases in Kuwait and Bahrain and threatened to halt the talks with the U.S. That comes after the U.S. struck Iranian targets last week in response to Iran's alleged drone attacks on a Singaporean flagged ship. Since then, a halt on attacks and the talks for a ceasefire have been agreed to, but no word on if the White House will count this as a second war's peace achieved by the glorious leader. Trump's latest brilliant suggestion. Thank you. We've had some problems with that, and it's continuing, but we'll try to figure out how to work that in.
I thought it was Groucho coming back for more.
Yeah, Groucho kind of got out a syllable, but I don't think he got out a full word.
It's war, God damn it.
Yeah, exactly. It's war is what he's saying. Was all that I heard. But so Trump's latest brilliant suggestion for the Middle East is that Israel needs to leave Lebanon, and in their place, Syria should engage by coming in and challenging Hezbollah. Syria's war with Hezbollah were as successful and remembered by the Lebanese as most of Israel's interventions into Lebanon. Israel is said to be studying the suggestion, and Syrian leaders say, "No, thank you." They're worried about how they're going to deal with restructuring their internal issues from having a 14-year civil destruction, and they have no interest in going back into Lebanon or having anything to do with Hezbollah or Lebanon. And as we all know, Hezbollah are insurgents backed by Iran. So Syria's had their fill of Hezbollah. Even if it's the glorious leader who suggests, yeah, we'll let Syria do the work against Hezbollah, and that will make everything better. Okay. It's time for an Epstein update. We've been talking about so many issues and things, and Affordability Act and the so-called SAVED Act and the elections, but we don't want to overlook the Epstein files, right? So Hannah mentioned this actually initially, but the DOJ is facing a judge's order to release unredacted versions of some of the Epstein files. A former MSNBC legal analyst, Katie Fang, sued and won to have them released. It's only some emails, it's a dozen or so, including one where Epstein sends something in the reply about how he loves seeing the torture video. DOJ says it's wrong to bring this case. When the court was hearing this case, DOJ's argument was it's wrong to bring the case because the legal analyst could have just filled out a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act. And she, in turn, pointed out that there are certain restrictions when you send in a FOIA request. And so she felt the only way to handle it was by bringing it before a judge specifically, which she did, and she won. So good for her, because the release of the unredacted versions is covered in the Epstein Transparency Act and is something that was supposed to have been done already, which was the basis of her suit. The DOJ now has till July 2nd to release them, or to not release them and provide a show of cause. So to provide a statement as to why they can't do it. Gee whiz, I wonder which we'll see before July 2nd. It's alleged we'll see it by the 2nd, but they'll come up with it's very possible they could come up with some sort of delay or some reason they can't do it. Let's go, before we go on to the next one or two items in this issue, what do you guys think about the lawsuit? What do you think about releasing some unredacted Epstein files?
I'm obviously for releasing anything unredacted or any more of the Epstein lists or files. It's lovely to hear that he loves the torture video. That's great that he just continues to be the worst. And I don't really know if there's any lower that he can go, in my opinion, but I guess it got a little eyebrow raise from me. But Yeah, I mean, I think that it's humorous in a sad way to see this reprimanding and being like, well, you should have done a FOIA. It's there's no way to genuinely think that people are not interested in this information. You know, it's very cynical to think that I don't know, that people are, just hadn't thought of something. Um, yeah, I guess that's my thought about it.
Tom?
I read a pretty interesting write up on this by Jay Quo. He's got a Substack, as so many do these days, but he's got a legal background, and he wrote up an article about this, about when you write FOIA requests, there apparently for privacy reasons and other things, there's lots of excuses, and there's lots of reasons they can be shot down. FOIA requests go nowhere. And so when you do a lawsuit like this, anyway, he sort of points out all the different rocky shoals that your boat can run aground on when you're trying to extract information from the government. And so he does a really good job, I thought, of explaining why this lawsuit was so hard to craft, what has happened to even Massey and the legislators who wrote the law itself couldn't get the information they wanted out of this, and she managed to do it. Jay Quo did a really good job writing up of what happens to people who have tried before, why FOIA requests don't usually produce any results, why the lawsuit had to be specific to a certain number of documents, because if you're just asking for the world, it's easy for a judge to deny it. So apparently there was some real care and skill put into this thing. And I remember a quote. They said a lot of other people would have, complained about it and threw something at the wall to see if it sticked and called a career of it. Katie Fang did the work, and at least, like you said, tomorrow it'll probably be a bunch of horseshit and excuses, but at least we got this far. So good for her.
Very good. And I will also mention that there's now a website that's set up. It looks like a Gmail account. It is a faux Gmail account that is called jmail.world. And if it's allegedly Jeffrey Epstein's Gmail account. So you go into it and it looks like a setup of a common, everyday Gmail setup. And you can go in and you can see who he got emails from. There's a list on the side of all the people who sent them, so you can go just to look at a specific person's emails to him if you want. It has flight histories in there, so you can see who was on his plane and when. And there's lists of Amazon purchases related to him and his island, and those from that venture. So that's an interesting way to present the material that I think it makes it a little more accessible if you want to look around, see what's going on there. And you mentioned Thomas Massey. I'll also mention that he's going to try to force a vote this week to release names of all U.S. House members who have used tax dollars to settle sexual misconduct claims. So that's not a directly Epstein-related thing, but it is a good thing. Another good thing. Chalk up another good one for Thomas Massey. Here he is doing the right thing at the end of his term, as he lost and has been kicked out of his seat. He is going out by making certain that a lot of information comes out that most certainly would not have otherwise. And I believe that brings us to our own little information on Epstein that we keep, called the Epstein Count Up. And other than the 8 sets of emails mentioned above, there's another, I think it's 10 million pages of the Epstein's files that we have not seen unredacted and have not been released. So we're continuing our Epstein Count Up. Should we get merch for this? I wonder. the days since the unredacted Epstein list has not been released. Today is day 4033. Thanks for joining us for PolitiPod Live for Political Talk. You're welcome to join us every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, right here for PolitiPod Live. If you want political laughs, join us and a half dozen of our friends for our monthly political comedy podcast, PolitiPod. You'll find that at soundcloud.com/PolitiPod.
I'm Tom Bickle.
I'm Hannah Soldner.
And I'm Matt Nisanoff saying goodbye.